Welcome to Calculus AB video for skill number 114. I can find the inverse of a function. And the trivia question for today is, featured below is a sculpture of the goddess Athena, who was chosen to be the guardian of the city of Athens. Who was she competing against to be the guardian of the city? Alright, we'll start the notes on page 114A. And what I've written down here is a four-step process which works very often for finding inverses. Step one is you want to put your equation in y equals format. Usually you might start with like f of x equals, and you can just change that to y equals for now. And then you solve the equation for x. So if you had something like y equals x plus 2, you would have y plus 2 equals x. And then you want to replace x with y and replace y with x. And there you have more or less the inverse function, and then you write it in inverse notation. So x plus 2 is f inverse of x, and that inverse symbol is f to the negative 1. You don't want to think of this as an exponent. It actually means take the inverse of the function f. So, example 1, find the inverse of f of x equals 4 over x plus 4 plus 2. So the first thing I did in step 1 was I wrote it in y equals form. And then in step 2, I went about the process of solving for x. So the first thing I did was I subtracted 2 from both sides. And then the next step, I did something equivalent to cross multiplying. I was able to put the x plus 4 up here and the y minus 2 down there. And then in the next step I subtracted 4 from both sides. And now we have an equation that's solved for x. So I do step 3, which is replace x with y and y with x. So those two switch places, and you get what looks like the inverse, and then you write it with inverse notation. So now we have found the inverse of this function. On page 114b, we talk about what it means for a function to be one-to-one, and that means on the domain, f of a never equals f of b whenever a is not b. And that's kind of math jargony. It's best understood through a horizontal line test. So if you have some function, this curve right here, if a horizontal line, wherever you draw it, only passes through one point on the curve, then the function is said to be one-to-one. And if a function is one-to-one, then we can find the inverse very easily. Or at least there is an inverse. Finding it's a little bit challenging on some problems. The next problem, or the next graph that I've shown, there's locations on the graph where the line does pass through more than one point. There's several locations. So because the horizontal line passes through more than one, the function is considered to be not one-to-one. And if that's the case, there does not exist an inverse for the function unless we restrict the domain. So the example I give here is x squared. So this function is not one-to-one, but if we restrict the domain to only be, we'll say x is greater than or equal to 0, then we can find an inverse. Alright, and the final part of this skill is two functions, we'll call them f and g, can be shown to be inverses of one another using the method in example 1. Or we can do that by showing that the composite functions f of g of x is equal to x, and g of f of x is equal to x. So if we wanted to show that, I've done that in the next example, example 2. Show that f of x equals negative 2x plus 4 and g of x equals negative 1/2 x plus 2 are inverses. So first I evaluated f of g of x. So I plugged my g equation in for the variable of my f equation, and I went through the process of distributing the negative 2 in. That gives me x minus 4, and then I simplify that all out and I find the answer is x. And that's good, but we don't want to stop there. We also have to show that the composite function g of f of x is equal to x. So I went through this process and found that to also be equal to x. The conclusion, because both of those are true, we can say that f and g are inverses of one another. Thanks for watching the video for skill number 114. And featured below is Athena, and she was given the privilege of being the protector of the city of Athens because in the competition she gave the city of Athens an olive tree. She was competing against Poseidon, who struck the ground to make a well, but unfortunately the well he gave was of salt water, so they chose Athena over Poseidon.